In the last lesson, we saw how graduating sooner reduces the cost of college while simultaneously increasing your lifetime earnings. In that lesson, I assumed that no matter how long it took you to graduate, you always took 120 hours. In this lesson, we will see that another way to make sure you graduate sooner is to take fewer classes. Wait, what do I mean? How could you possibly take fewer classes? As you will see, almost every student who graduates could have taken fewer classes. Let me start with a little history. I was the Department Chair of Business Administration for 9 years at Southern Polytechnic State University. One of my duties was to check the graduation petition of every single business and accounting student who graduated from SPSU during those years. All of our undergraduate degrees required 120 semester hours. This is fairly common, as I have mentioned in prior lessons. In my 9 years as Department Chair, not a single student graduated with just 120 hours. Not one. That means every single student graduated with more hours than they needed to get their degree. Every single one. One student graduated with over 200 hours. She had paid for over 200 hours of tuition and the related fees for a degree that required only 120 hours. I got curious about this. At one meeting of all the department chairs, I asked if anyone had ever had a student graduate with just the hours they needed to graduate. Not a single department chair could remember a single student who had just the hours they needed. Thousands of students graduated in those 9 years across all the majors. And no one could remember a single student who had not taken extra hours. According to the Complete College America report, the average undergraduate student has 134 credit hours when they graduate. That is 14 extra hours. There are lots of reasons why students end up taking more hours than they need to graduate, and not all of them are avoidable. But many are. I'll give you the top reasons I know of so you can try to avoid as many of them as you can. In my experience, changing majors is, by far, the biggest reason that students take more hours than they need. For example, if a student changes majors from engineering to accounting, then none of their engineering courses are likely to count towards the accounting degree. This is a tough one. If you are miserable in your current major, it does not make sense to stick it out just to graduate while taking fewer hours. Still, if you must change majors, the sooner you switch, the better. That way, you end up taking fewer wasted courses. I once had an engineering student who was 1 semester away from graduating who wanted to change to accounting. He was so close to graduating that I turned him down. I told him to get his engineering degree and then come see me. In my experience, the second biggest reason that students take more hours than they need is changing schools. In other words, transferring. For example, if you check, you will see that the courses required for a degree in electrical engineering from MIT are not the same as those from Georgia Tech. Not only that, the core courses are not the same either. If a student transfers from MIT to Georgia Tech, then they will lose all the courses that MIT required in the major and core that are not required by Georgia Tech. The best they can do is hope they are counted as electives. This is another tough one. For students living at home, if your parents move, then you have to change schools. For students working full-time while going to school, if your job transfers you, then you have to change schools as well. This is particularly true if your current school does not have a strong online presence, or if your degree is one, like engineering, that is not well suited to online courses. If it is an option, look into finishing online if you have to move. Otherwise, be sure to check all of your school options at the new location to see which one can use more of your transfer credits. This is not always straightforward. Their website can help, but the advising office or registrar's office are your best alternatives. Double majors are almost always a bad idea. In fact, in all of my years of advising students, I have never seen a scenario where a double major makes sense. It is such a bad idea that I have an entire lesson on avoiding double majors. So, I will save my comments for that lesson. Just know for now, a double major is a bad idea. For a variety of reasons, many students need to stay full-time students. The two main reasons are a scholarship requirement or student loan that requires you to remain a full-time student or needing to stay on your parents' medical insurance. Fortunately, medical insurance is less of an issue with the Affordable Care Act. At most colleges, full-time means 12 hours in spring and fall. By the way, if you go to college in summer or not, and how many hours you take in summer, generally has no impact on if you are considered a full-time student or not. If you need to remain a full-time student, and there are not 12 hours you can take that count towards your major and work with your schedule, then you have no choice but to take a course you do not need. This is especially an issue at smaller colleges due to their limited selection of courses. There are two things you can do to reduce your chances of ending up in this situation. The first is to pay particular attention to the prerequisites in your major. I have seen cases where students had not taken a commonly needed prerequisite and ended up not being able to take additional major courses until they took that prerequisite. I call it being prerequisite locked. The second thing you can do is pay attention to the course schedule for all the courses you need to graduate, especially at smaller colleges. What you will find is they tend to follow a regular pattern. Knowing that pattern allows you to take these courses at times that work for your schedule. You may find this hard to believe, but I've seen a lot of students taking courses they do not need just because they made a mistake. In fact, I've seen students mistakenly taking courses they'd already taken and passed. Not just once or twice, but lots of times. College catalogs can be confusing and hard to read. My advice to avoid mistake is twofold. First, sit down early with an advisor at the college and make a list of the courses you need to take to graduate. That way you can check off courses as you take them and only register for the courses remaining on your list. Second, go back and review your registration schedule with your advisor before starting each semester. That gives you one last chance to spot a mistake. While not common, I have had students take an easy course or even retake courses they made a C in so they can raise their GPA. That makes sense if you have a scholarship that requires a minimum GPA or you are below the GPA required to graduate. It is, however, hard to raise your GPA much using this approach. I have an entire lesson on that. Unless you absolutely have to raise your GPA, I would strongly recommend you avoid trying to raise it and just worry about graduating. I promise you, after your first job out of college, no employer will ever ask you what your GPA was. I know I've never been asked. In fact, I cannot even remember what my undergraduate GPA was. Not only that, I cannot even remember my graduate GPA. That's how unimportant it is. Finally, students sometimes take courses they do not need to graduate just because they sound interesting. I'm guilty of this. While working on my PhD in management, I took some journalism courses just because I wanted to learn to write better. You know how to avoid this, just don't take courses you don't need. Still, I would never ever discourage a student from taking a course because it sounds interesting. In conclusion, it is in your best interest to only take those courses you need to graduate. The best way to do that is to keep track of the courses you need and only take courses if they are on that list. Avoid double majors. If you are considering double majoring, be sure to watch my lesson on that. There's almost always a better approach to accomplish the same thing. And avoid retaking courses or taking easy courses you do not need just to raise your GPA. Unless, of course, you absolutely have to in order to keep a scholarship or graduate. And naturally, it is better to do well in your courses to avoid getting into this situation in the first place.